back in the days before the advent of GPS, highly accurate laser ring gyros, and INS systems, and back before red-hot fighter jocks started to get diagnosed with the incurable affliction known as the JDAM Blues. Weapons still had to be delivered on target, at any time, and in all weather conditions. Whether it was Secretary McNamara trying to get his bomb tonnage dropped on the north and body count quotas met, or concentrations of Syrian and Egyptian armor thinking they were safe from the IAF beneath overcast skies. The problem of accurately dropping air-to-ground ordnance in any weather, day or night, has vexed pilots, planners, and aerospace engineers since the first time a hand grenade was hucked over the side of a scout plane in the First World War. And especially with the advent and implementation of strategic bombing in the lead-up to and during the Second World War, where streams of hundreds of 8th Air Force B-17s and B-24s could be diverted to secondary targets or missions scrubbed entirely at the last minute when targets became obscured by smoke generators or clouds in the perpetually angry skies of Northern Europe. But this problem of all-weather bombing became a particular thorn in the side of American planners and airmen in the skies over Southeast Asia, where tropical monsoons could mean visual bombing techniques would be all but impossible or far too dangerous in the mountainous terrain for months at a time. And while differing services and different aircraft designers took divergent approaches to tackling this challenge, culminating in aircraft such as the F-111 Aardvark and A-6 Intruder, the principal means of delivering tactical fighter aircraft and all-weather bombing capability throughout the 1960s and 70s was through long-range, ground-based radio navigation aids such as TACAN and LORAN, coupled with a little bit of math. Since LORAN systems are not yet implemented in DCS, and we have no aircraft available to us to take advantage of such systems, we're going to be focusing on the simplest and thus most accurate method of TACAN bombing in today's tutorial and demonstration. But do keep in mind that TACAN bombing is not a pinpoint accurate bombing method. You won't be hitting individual tanks, bunkers, or bridges. Rather, you want to utilize TACAN bombing for area targets such as sprawling airfield complexes, bridgeheads, and troop concentrations, or the ever-elusive suspected truck park. And man, I can't wait to implement TACAN bombing into my Cold War-focused multiplayer missions for all of our Cold War-focused aircraft. And guys, I'm Spud, as always, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay guys, let's get started with the mission editor setup and mission planning phase of performing a TACAN bombing attack here in DCS World. Now you'll notice we're using the Sinai map here as our backdrop for today's demonstration. And that's because, contrary to popular belief, the weather does get bad over the Middle East. And several times during the War of Attrition and Yom Kippur War period of the early 1970s, Israeli Air Force pilots were forced to fall back to TACAN bombing methods to get weapons onto targets through the weather. Now, Israeli Air Force pilots really disliked TACAN bombing because they were more used to much better prevailing conditions throughout the Middle East, unlike their American counterparts flying and fighting over in Southeast Asia. So the first thing we need to do here is, of course, identify the target that we've been assigned for today's mission. That's going to be Kippur Air Base here in the Suez Canal zone just to the east of the Great Salt Lake. And that's a sprawling airbase complex there, and that's very important because TACAN bombing is not going to be a pinpoint accurate bombing method. You're not going to be hitting individual tanks or trucks or buildings or bridges. This is going to be going after large area targets, say bridgeheads, suspected truck parks in Southeast Asia, airfield complexes here in the Sinai map, things of that nature. Then, of course, once you have identified your target, you then want to select a TACAN station that's going to help guide you into that target. And that target, as well as the flight path inbound to the target, needs to be within the service volume of the TACAN station you have selected. It's also important to remember that you want to select a TACAN station that's not too far away from your intended target. This is because the further and further and further away you get from a VOR or TACAN station, the more and more and more coarse the navigational accuracy is going to be. A good rule of thumb to keep in mind is if you're 60 nautical miles DME away from a VOR or TACAN station, and you're at a 1 degree of deviation from the radial you intend to fly on, that's going to be a full nautical mile of lateral separation from the track you would like to be flying over the ground. Which, of course, when you're dropping bombs, means that your bombs could fall way away from your target. It's also important to select a TACAN station that you know the bad guys aren't going to corrupt, such as the TACAN station that's actually located here at Kippur Air Base, or a TACAN station that could be destroyed and brought offline in the middle of your flight inbound to the target by, say, a friendly flight of jets who are also bombing the same target. So as a result here, a great TACAN station to use would be Melez Airfield here, which is a VORTAC on station 38 X-ray. But for the sake of demonstration today, why don't we make ourselves a custom TACAN station for us to use for our TACAN bombing of Kippur Air Base. We'll place that TACAN station here at Bir Hassana Airfield. In order to place that custom station, all you got to do is go over to the Vehicles button over here. We'll go ahead and come down to Combined Task Forces Blue. Our type is already pre-selected for us, the TACAN Portable TTS 3030 Portable TACAN Station. We'll make the skill Excellent, not that that really makes a big difference for us here today. And we're going to keep the group name Custom TACAN 1 with the unit name Custom TACAN 1 as well, so that way we can keep track of this TACAN station in a sprawling mission with hundreds, maybe even thousands of units to make things as easy as possible as us as the mission makers. We'll go ahead and plop that TACAN station down here at Bir Hassana Airfield. Now, in order to actually activate a TACAN station on this little vehicle unit we've placed here, we need to add it just the same way we would for an aircraft carrier or any other unit in DCS. We're going to go to the Advanced Waypoint Actions, we're going to hit Add. For Type, under Perform Command, we're going to scroll to the bottom and hit Activate TACAN Station. We're going to make sure that bearing is still checked. Channel mode, X-ray, or Yankee, up to you. Just make sure that if you're using the Yankee band, you're not going to be conflicting with any other nav aids that might be placed in your mission file. And we'll take a look at that in just a moment so you can see and make sure you're not duplicating TACAN or VORTAC channels. Channel is going to be, let's set it up for 121 X-ray. Call sign, we'll call it Bir Hassana, BHS, why not? And then of course we need to assign it to a unit. That unit's going to be Custom TACAN 11, as we can see up here. Very important here to ensure that our TACAN station isn't accidentally set to a unit way far away from where we intend that TACAN to be coming from. Okay, once we have that set, we are almost set and ready to go. The last thing that we want to take a look at before we actually start setting up our aircraft that we're going to fly for our TACAN bombing attack here is we want to ensure that our custom TACAN station here on 121 X-Ray is not going to interfere with any of the other nav aids that are already placed on the map by default. We can do this by going up to the View tab, Beacons Info, and we can narrow things down and get rid of things like VORs, DMEs, and VOR DMEs, and ICLSs, and just look at the TACANs and VORTAC stations. Taking a look here, we can see that our custom TACAN highlighted in blue here is on 121 X-Ray, and it looks like we are set and good to go, and it is not going to be interfering with anyone else. With that, we can set up the aircraft we're going to fly for our TACAN bombing of Kippur Air Base, and I'm sure you guys already know how to do that here in the mission editor, so I'm going to save some time here, and we're going to jump straight to the cockpit and start setting up for our attack on Kippur. Alright guys, we are back in the cockpit. And in this section of today's demonstration of TACAN bombing methods, we're going to be generating the values and inputs that we're going to need to navigate to our target via our TACAN station and generate a weapons release point to hopefully get our weapons onto the target as accurately as possible. Now, you'll notice we're flying the Kippur F-4E Phantom II for today's demonstration, but any aircraft capable of receiving and interpreting TACAN navigational signals is able to use this TACAN bombing method. The reason we're flying the F-4 today is because the bombing table utility integrated into Kippur's F-4 makes our job a heck of a lot easier. And please keep in mind that the values that you generate from the bombing table here in the F-4 can be transferred over to any other jet in DCS. I hope that one day Kippur will allow us to use this utility in other aircraft in DCS or run this utility outside of DCS world entirely. So to start off with, we're going to generate the navigational values that we need to navigate towards our target and get us further down the line to figuring out our weapon release point. We'll do this by opening up the F10 map. We can see we're just in an orbit in southern Israel here, setting up for our attack on Kippur. We'll go ahead and pause the simulation so we don't waste too much gas here and potentially crash our F4. And we're going to scroll across the map here to our custom TACAN station we placed at Bir Hassana. And of course, we can see our target over here at Kippur Air Base. Now we're going to select the ruler tool up at the top here, and we're going to zoom in nice and close to our custom TACAN station. We're going to want to start the ruler as close to the point where our navigational signals from our TACAN station are going to be emanating from. Now, it is a bit of a horseshoes and hand grenades kind of thing, but do keep in mind that the errors that you make are going to snowball and become bigger and bigger and bigger down the line as we interpolate our way to our weapons release point. So putting our mouse right in the middle of our TACAN station here and pressing and holding right click, we're going to drag out our ruler. Now we can see our magnetic course on the left-hand side there, highlighted in blue with the M next to it. This is the value we need. We do not want the true course. TACAN radials are expressed in magnetic course, not true course. So this is very, very important because if you accidentally use true, you're going to be putting your bombs in an entirely incorrect zip code. And of course, we can see our DME there off to the right-hand side after the comma, which is of course extremely important for today as well. We're going to use our mouse wheel here to zoom on out, and then we'll kind of scroll our way across the map on over to Kippur. Now again, guys, this is kind of a horseshoes and hand grenades kind of situation, but we're going to try and get as accurate as possible. We can see here that the radial that we're going to utilize is going to be the 269 radial out of the 121 X-ray TACAN station. We can also see that our DME is going to be about 47.8 nautical miles from the TACAN station to the very center of our target here. But I think I'm going to bias that and adjust my target point just a little bit, and I'm going to go with a value of 47.7 DME for the middle of my target here. So we'll go ahead and write these down on a notebook or a kneeboard here, and I highly recommend that you always fly Cold War jets with a notebook out and ready to rock and roll. So our radial that we're going to fly on to the target is going to be the 269 radial, and our target DME is going to be at 47.7 DME. You don't want to go to a second decimal place there just because you're not going to be able to see that second decimal place in the HSI of your F4 or really any other jet that we have here in DCS. And if it's kind of somewhere in the middle, you're going to have to do a little bit of interpolation. And again, it's a horseshoes and hand grenades kind of situation here. So we have that set and ready to go. And now it's time to go back to the cockpit of our F4 and generate our weapons release point. So for this, we're going to open up the bombing table once again. And for our mode of delivery, this is going to need to be set to direct here for generating the correct values for our TACAN weapon delivery. Type of bomb is going to be Mark 82. We've got 12 Mark 82s hung under the belly of our F4 today. Our run-in speed, I always like to have that set to about 525 knots of true airspeed. Release altitude for today, we're cruising just under 20,000 feet, and we're going to set that for our weapon release altitude. For our target altitude, you're going to want to make sure you get this as accurate as possible, but because we've got Kippur Air Base right in the Suez Canal zone, we know it's going to be basically right at sea level, so we're going to leave it at 0 feet MSL for our target. Aircraft total weight, this is going to be basically automatically adjusted to the total weight of your aircraft when you open up the bombing table. And for transferring your values to other aircraft in DCS, this is not going to be quite as important. Dive angle for today is going to be 0 degrees because this is going to be a level bombing method. Now our sight depression here is showing a little bit of an error message, and that's okay. That's just letting us know that we aren't going to get enough reticle depression in mils to actually show where the bombs are going to impact via our LCOS sight in the F4. And that's totally fine. The value here that we're really interested in is going to be bomb range. Bomb range here is showing a range of 29,263 feet, and we're going to want to write that down on our notebook or our kneeboard. So 29,262 feet. Now, what is this value? This value is how far your bombs are going to travel horizontally across the ground once they leave your aircraft with a dive angle of 0 degrees. You can even check your work here by increasing the dive angle and seeing the bomb range change. So we'll bring that back down to 0. Time of flight, we don't really care about that, but for the sake of our delivery for today, our pattern is going to be a release interval of 0.1 seconds. Our interval multiplier is going to be normal, and we're going to want to have our 5th bomb represent the middle of our stick of bombs, so that way we get a margin of error before and after the target point at 47.7 DME on the 269 radial from our TACAN station. So once we've got that, we're going to tell Jester here, and he's going to input that into the WRCS of our F-4E Phantom II. And once you have this value here, this is all you need in order to transfer over and use TACAN bombing in any other aircraft type in DCS world. So now that we have these values generated, we need to do some scary math here. So we'll go ahead and pause the simulation here, and I'm going to pop up onto the screen here all of the different mathematical formulas we're going to use in order to get our weapon release point. So we need to convert our bomb range value here of 29,263 feet over to nautical miles rather than feet, so that way we can compare that to the DME distance to our target, Kippur Air Base. So we're going to do that by taking our calculator on our handy iPhone that they did not have back in the 1970s, and we'll input the value of 29,263 feet, and we're going to divide that by 6,076 feet. There are 6,076 feet in a nautical mile. We'll see what that gives us, and that's going to give us almost exactly 4.8 nautical miles of horizontal travel of our bombs when we release them off of the aircraft. We're going to make sure that we write that down on our knee board here, so 4.8 nautical miles for our weapon bomb range. So then we're going to take our DME that we generated from the F10 map for our target point, and we're going to subtract 4.8 nautical miles from it. So popping that back into our handy dandy iPhone calculator, again, not very historically accurate for the 1970s here. We're going to pop in 47.7 DME, which is our target point, and we're going to subtract 4.8 DME from that, which is going to give us a weapons release point of 42.9 DME from our TACAN station. So we gotta make sure that we definitely write this down on our notebook here and make sure that it's nice and bolded, so that way we don't forget it as we're flying inbound to our target and getting ready to release our weapons. And guys, it is that easy. That is all the math that you need to do in order to generate that weapon release point. So at this point, all I need to do is just fly into the target area and drop your bombs, which we're going to go over in the next part here. Alright guys, this section of our TACAN bombing demonstration is going to be all about setting up our cockpit for and executing our attack on our target now that we have our navigational information and our weapons release point generated. The first thing we need to do is tune in to the TACAN station we're going to be using for our navigation to our target. For today, that's going to be 121 X-ray as we set up in the mission editor here, so we'll set that up, 121 X-ray. We're on transmit receive, and we're going to set up our HSI and ADI for TACAN navigation by bringing our selector to the TACAN positions. We're going to turn on our flight director, and we can see we are at 38 DME from our TACAN station at Bir Hassana. We're going to select our radial on our course set of 269 to get us from our TACAN station to our target. And I'm also going to go ahead and set my heading over to 269 as well to give me a little bit more guidance using the flight director on the ADI. Now, there's a number of different methods that you can use to actually get yourself onto the 269 radial outbound from the Bir Hassana TACAN station we set up, and all of them are valid. Taking a look at the F10 map, you have three options. You can either intercept that course line on this side of the TACAN station, you can intercept that radial on the from side of the TACAN station, or you can fly directly to the fix and then outbound on that 269 radial. I personally prefer to fly directly to the fix and then outbound on my specified radial. I find that that's going to be the easiest, and that's what I recommend you guys do for your first couple times utilizing this TACAN bombing method. So with that out of the way, fusing is set to nose and tail, left inner center, right inner pylon selected, direct bombing method, bombs for the weapon selector, 0.1 seconds for our interval, and a quantity of 12 bombs. LCOS to air to ground, master arm to arm, and we are set and ready to go with 23 DME to our TACAN station to spare. Now, we have ourselves a really nice shallow intercept angle for the 269 radial. But keep in mind that when you're flying a fast jet like an F4, you're going to want to start turning towards your radial from as early a point as possible, so that way you don't just go blowing right on through it.
So for this bombing method, the flight lead of the formation of jets is going to be very much heads down in his cockpit, flying off of his HSI and ADI. This means that the wingmen that are flying formation off of him and waiting for the cue to release their weapons are going to be the eyes and ears for the lead in this case. Keeping an eye out for SAMs, AAA, MiGs, things of that nature, because that lead F4 or that lead F5, Mirage F1, whatever it might be, he's just going to be buried in his cockpit. Alright, so we can see we're coming up on 13 DME from our TACAN station, and once we just see a little bit of movement from our CDI on the HSI, we're going to start our left-hand turn to 269 on the heading. CDI should start moving here, and we're going to start just a very gentle turn on towards 269. And you can see there, our CDI kind of blew right through. Well, that's okay, we've still got quite a bit of distance to go to get that radial back. We're also going to want to climb a little bit up to our set altitude of 20,000 feet for our weapon release altitude. So clearly that wasn't the best intercept of a radial I've ever flown, but we'll make up for it here. And again, that CDI is going to be most sensitive when you're directly over the top of the TACAN station. Okay. I'm going to kick the autopilot off for just a moment here, and I'm going to climb us on up to 20,000 feet. That's a nice, gentle, steady climb as we work to re-intercept our radial. There we go. CDI's moving again. Perfect. And we're just going to start the very gentle turn on back over to 269 for the heading. A little bit high in the altitude. And we'll start to bring her on down a little bit. We just want to be as precise as we possibly can, because, of course, any error is just going to snowball further and further and further on down the line and make our bombs fall wider and wider away from our target. So there we go. There's 20,000 feet. Autopilot is on. So we are back to control wheel steering on our stick, so that way we can ideally be as accurate as possible in flying on this radial. Okay, weapon release point again, 42.9 DME. I'm going to double check all of my switches. Our fusing is good to go, stations are selected properly, quantity is set, interval is set, bombs are set, bombing table is set.
Roger.
And we are ready to rock. So it looks like we have a slight deviation to the right, of course, so I'm going to correct by coming off to the left just slightly. And again, the further and further we get from the TACAN station, the less and less sensitive that CDI is going to become, and it's going to be easier to track that radial. But keep in mind, the further you get away from the TACAN station, the more coarse the navigational information you're receiving, and the more likely it is that you're going to drop your bombs wildly off target. So it's all about flying as precisely as you possibly can. There we go. That's looking pretty darn good right there. And you can see just how heads down in the cockpit I am as I'm flying. It's really up to my wingman to be my eyes and ears here. There's 30 DME, about 12.9 DME to go. Reset our track IR here, make things a little bit easier for us. And to kind of double check that we have everything set and ready to go, let's pause the simulation for a second and take a look at us. Perfect, right there on the 269 radial, flying directly nose on to Kippur. double checking everything here. There we go. We're about 530 knots of true airspeed, so that's pretty darn close to the 525 we set. So I think everything is working out pretty well for us so far. It looks like on the CDI, we're still deviating just slightly to the right, of course, so we'll make a correction back on over to the left. Now, your wingmen who are flying in formation with you are waiting on the leader for the cue to drop their weapons. That cue might either be a verbal radio call from you as the leader, or it could be a non-verbal cue, such as the weapons falling away from my aircraft. And if they have all the navigational info set as well, they'll be able to see in their own cockpit us getting closer and closer to that weapon release point. However, as the leader here in DCS, I do recommend that you make some verbal calls to your wingmen so that way they know exactly when to expect to drop their weapons. Okay, there is 40 DME. Weapon release point is 42.9 DME. We're right on the 269 radial, just making some slight corrections. There's 42, and bombs away. All right. So once the weapons are away from your aircraft, you no longer have to be heads down, and it's now time to dodge all that AAA, those SAMs, and those MiGs that you were ignoring as you were flying inbound to your target. So now let's take a look at our bombs as they're falling down to the target. So they are going to come right through the cloud deck here. And let's see how accurate we were able to be. Oh my gosh, it looks like we did it correctly. Okay, and free camera. Boom. Hit right in the vicinity of our target area. That is absolutely perfect, guys. That is exactly what we wanted to see, and that is right at the DME that we set for our target point. Ideally, we probably should have set a much higher interval to get a much longer spread of bombs across our target, and hopefully we could have walked that stick of bombs right across the two runways here. But that is a correction for the next time here, and I'm very, very happy with this result here. So if you're very careful and you're very precise with your flying, and you don't have MiGs coming into your 6 o'clock, you don't have SAMs being fired, you don't have AAA, you can see here that it can be quite accurate. So I hope you guys enjoyed this demonstration, and I hope you learned something from this, and I am really looking forward to implementing TACAN Bombing into my multiplayer missions, because I think it would be a fantastic and monumental challenge for my community members. So if you liked the video, guys, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Enjoy this beautiful game, and especially the Kippur F-4E Phantom II. And Kippur, please, for the love of God, please let us use the bombing table utility outside of the F4, and maybe even outside of DCS entirely. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.